So here's a really good example of where using Visual Studio's debugger, or really any IDE's debugger, really comes in useful. So I have this bug that I'm dealing with right now, and uh, what the bug is, and you can actually see I got some errors that are similar, it's based on the same issue. But if I mine a block here, you'll see that when it breaks, there's no particle effect, and there's actually no sound, although I have the sound turned off. And you'll see that these errors pop up, and there's other errors popping up because of other NPCs that are doing a similar thing that caused the error. And so I want to know, okay, this is a no reference exception, but what exactly is causing this error? So what I'll do is I'll either double click on the log, or sometimes what I'll do is just for sanity is I'll click on the first, like the topmost blue text, double click on it, and what it'll do is it'll take me into Visual Studio, and it'll take me to the exact line where the issue is happening. In fact, I think this is a, let's see here, try it again. Okay, pause. All right, okay. There was, I think, another error happening on a different line, but yeah. So this is the one issue I was getting, and I believe there's probably others, but this might cover most. But basically, it's saying there's a null reference exception. So somewhere on, you know, on that one line of code, one of these things is null. Either the instance variable is null, or it is this thing that's null. It can't be this thing because there's no dot operator after it. It's only this thing or this thing, or it could be maybe something else, but I know there's something here. I just don't know where the null is, but I have to figure out where it is. So I have the debugger on right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a breakpoint, and I'm going to go unpause the game and do it again. Mine this block, and instantaneously it'll take me to the screen and actually show me that line. And luckily, in this case, it's pretty simple. Sometimes you have to do a little bit more. You have things called conditional breakpoints, so you can actually, in Visual Studio, really nice feature, you can actually have it break when a certain variable is like, so if you have to check if a specific thing is null or some specific check, you know, it'll break. But in this case, I know for a fact that this breakpoint was hit and that there will indeed be an error that occurs because of this line. If we hover over the instance, it'll tell me that it's not null. It's the data is populated. Um, if we look at the next thing, nodes, you can see it's null, right? So what is this actually? What is nodes? Nodes is, and I always tell myself, okay, look at the variable. What's the type? What is it? You know, try to understand what the heck this nodes thing is. So I go up and I go to the where it's declared. AI node is a class, right? It's a class. I know for a fact. And it's, well, actually, no, it might be a struct. No, it's a class. It could have been a struct. But even then, it's an array, so it's a reference type. That's what's important. It's a reference type. It's a 2D array, and by default, it's set to null. And there's a specific place where it gets set. It gets set here, right? It does get then, access and altered in other places in the code, but basically, this is the place where it's set to not null. So either this code is indeed running, or it ran and then something bad is happening. So the debugger, number one, the debugger basically helped me figure out that it's this node variable that's null. Good. Narrowed that down. Next, okay, so this code must not be running. So then what I'll do is I'll say, all right, I'll right click on it, go to find all references, and it'll tell me any place that this function is being called. It's a static function. So there's only one place where it's being called, so it's pretty simple. All right, it's being called here. So basically, this pathfinding system is being set up when the level is created. So when the level data structure is created, it will set up the pathfinding, and there you go. All right. Now, the reason why this issue is coming up is because of the fact that recently we've been doing some changes to how the level is initialized. And so there were certain assumptions that were made uh, when this pathfinding system was built. Certain assumptions were made about how the level was initialized. And because now, at this point in time, levels are being generated kind of how you would say they're being generated in a different location. They're actually being generated in a different scene in Unity from where they used to be created. And so what that means is that because this pathfinding manager is actually a mono behavior, right? And therefore this instance, here's what's funny. This instance, which we know is at this point in the breakpoint, which is actually here. So it's not null because it's, this thing has been created and it works. But when we, let's say, for example, do the, when we set things up in the other scene where, now the level is being generated in a different scene other than the cave scene, what ultimately happens is that you'll have uh, this code running, but basically it'll, be running in a different scene. And so when that other scene unloads, to try to keep things, summarized as much as I can here, basically this will actually get initialized as it should, but it'll do that in a completely different scene. And then what'll end up happening is that uh, the level will generate, and when the level gets passed to another static variable, and then it will load the cave scene. And so the cave scene will load faster because you've already generated the level. And what will happen is that obviously this instance, which existed in a different scene, is now unloaded, and therefore, to my point, this just becomes null. It literally just becomes null because the thing that it was initialized, but then it was immediately, you know, garbage collected or whatever. It was immediately destroyed. That data was immediately destroyed, and so it never ended up getting used. So inevitably, that's why we're getting this null reference exception. It's just because basically this thing is assuming that it's being initialized, or the level is being generated in the cave scene of Unity, which is what this is. This is the cave scene, what you're looking at right here. But now the level is being generated in a different scene. And so the pathfinding, it is set up and depends on that, the cave scene being already loaded, and that causes issues, right? And I can show you, I think I can maybe show you here. So I'm going to pause and then resume in a second. All right. Okay, so after that little pause, all right, so I am back at the kingdom scene. So this is the kingdom scene. This is actually now where the level is being generated, although the idea is that you could generate it with whatever scene that's open. That whole process could happen independently. That's my kind of idea here. But if we go into our debugger, I'm going to also turn the debugger back on. And now I've removed the breakpoint that was here, and I put a new breakpoint here. This is actually where the nodes is going to be initialized. And surprisingly, I'm surprised that I did not get an error, because this whole thing assumes that the pathfinding manager is instantiated. And from what I understand, the pathfinding manager, I did not realize was actually here, although technically it is. If I look here, it technically is, even though the pathfinding manager has no reason to be here, but it's probably there because if it wasn't, there would be an error, I'm guessing, or something like that, which in my opinion doesn't make sense. It's like, it confuses people who are looking the code. Like there's a reason why it's there, but it's there anyway, so it just makes things more confusing. Anyway, so with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to test this and show you what exactly I mean. So I'm going to leave the cave, and this is also going to show the new loading screen that I'm working on. And in fact, it immediately goes to the debug breakpoint. Yeah, it immediately hits the breakpoint. It's still it just hit the loading screen, and we're actually still in the kingdom scene, as you can see in the hierarchy view. But if I look at the breakpoint here, you'll see instance is not null, so it's not, it's been initialized, which kind of feels weird, but it's just how it works, I guess. And nodes is null, of course, because we just got to this point. This is happening because we're generating the level, right? If you go back, you'll see it's like, oh, this is a part of, initializing the level, so it makes sense. So that line of code, once we run that line of code, if it'll allow me. Just click the button, okay. You'll see now it's not null, right? Makes sense. But here's the thing. If I hit continue and then back to the scene view, you'll see it's, generating the level, doing all that stuff, and you'll see, watch, this is the important part. Or maybe something won't happen. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, so I thought something was going to happen, but it didn't. What I was expecting to happen is that this breakpoint would get hit again, but it makes sense that it didn't get hit because the level generation wasn't reinitialized. But what that means is that this variable, well, where was this variable, this AI node, where was that being stored? This is a variable of this pathfinding manager mono behavior that was in that other scene. That's the whole point that I'm reiterating just to make sure I'm clear with what I'm saying here. So this variable that was initialized, this node's variable, was initialized. But this variable is contained inside of this other variable called instance, which is a static variable, which is the pathfinding manager. But the pathfinding manager just got destroyed because it was in that other scene. So now that entire whatchamacallit, that entire, this thing just got destroyed. And so by proxy, all the nodes got destroyed. All that stuff that is what this is right here. That's a part of the pathfinding system. So just like that, I was able to, in about a couple minutes, honestly, I was able to figure out what the issue was, figure out, oh, this is the thing that's null. There might be some lines of code where it's like, you'll have like, one line of code that has like several dot operators, several member access operators in it, and it just becomes like a headache trying to figure out where the null is, right? And you might be tempted to just, if you're doing C#, you might be just tempted to like put a question mark before each dot, right? Which is not really a wise thing to do, but, it depends on your position. You're like, I just want to get this work and get it, although it'll trust me, it'll cause even more issues down the road. It's not, don't only use it where you actually need to use it. But yeah, so this debugger thing really helped me to figure out very quickly where the issue was happening because I had no clue, right? I made one little change, although I wouldn't say it was a little change, but I make one change that was little in terms of lines of code, but big in terms of what it was doing. And the result was this really weird error, and I haven't even fixed the error yet. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna make the where is it? I'm probably scrolling past it. I'm probably gonna make this variable static, or maybe what I'll do is I'll make it so that this or maybe I'll make it so it reinitializes in a different way or something like that. Or it doesn't necessarily need, like this setup process doesn't require the level to generate. It'll just happen kind of on its own regardless of that. One of those solutions. So yeah, this has been a video on just one really good example of where the debugger can really help you to sniff out exactly where an issue is happening.